Hey guys, I'm sorry. I want to encourage those of you. I want to encourage those of you that are in a season of isolation and you're believing for a promise. You're believing for redemption. And you are just in a season of isolation. I'm laughing because I'm thinking of in the kingdom, there could be bombs going off and everything's destroyed and we're just but the city's gonna be rebuilt. It's okay. There's a joy that can't be stolen. You know what I mean? It does not make sense. My friend and I are laughing because we're people would think we're insane if they knew some of the stuff that we've walked through and we're sitting here laughing, they would just think we're insane. But it really is such a genuine, pure joy having the revelation of Jesus in the midst of what seems like destruction, in the midst of hard seasons where you're isolated, you're going through heartache and grief, and everything seems to look the opposite of what God has promised you. There is a brook of bliss to be found. You guys, we as believers, this is the realm of happiness. The realm of the kingdom. This is the coolest thing ever, you guys. I just actually found this a few weeks ago when I was reading. I'm such a nerd and I love Greek, the Hebrew and the Greek. But the kingdom of heaven in Greek, that means the realm of happiness. We are living in this realm of happiness. And so regardless of what happens, regardless of the turmoil, of the trials, of the hard seasons, there is joy to be found. There is always a joy set before us. And so I want to get into actually what I want to say in this video, but I want to encourage those of you that are in a season of hiddenness, of seclusion, and of isolation, to those that have been led into the wilderness, so to speak, by the Spirit, to those that have been at his feet. I'm not talking about I'm isolated because I'm rebelling against what the Lord wants. I'm talking about the isolation that comes from obedience, the isolation that comes from denying ourselves and taking up our cross and following him and seeking him. And sometimes when he leads us in the way everlasting, he leads us to a place of isolation. It was the Spirit that led Jesus in the wilderness. And so if the Spirit has led you to a place of isolation, to a season of isolation, and you are just believing for redemption, I want to encourage you in this so in Luke chapter 1, starting in verse 6 in the Passion Translation, I'm just going to put out some nuggets here. And I want to encourage you to take this back to the secret place and just let his light shine on every dark place in your mind so you can enter into a greater revelation of him and enter into more of the depth of this realm of happiness. They were both righteous before God, living virtuously and following the commandments of the Lord blamelessly. Elizabeth and her husband, okay, and Zachariah the priest. So they were both righteous before God. They were following the Lord. They were obeying him. They were in the Spirit. They were abiding in his presence. They were chosen. They were called. They were living virtuously and following the commandments of the Lord blamelessly. So to those of you that have been living virtuously, to those of you that have been priests unto the Lord in the secret place and ministering to his heart and following him blamelessly, if you feel childless, if you feel promiseless, if you feel barrenness, if you feel like there's so many promises of redemption that the Lord has given you in this lifetime and they have not came to fruition yet, I want you to hear this. So they were following the Lord, but they were childless and they were believing for a promise. Zachariah was chosen by the Lord, An honor fell upon Zechariah to enter the holy place. There is an honor that has fallen upon us to enter into the secret place, to enter into his presence. In the midst of brokenness, he is near to the brokenhearted, and he wants to come near. He wants his honor to fall upon you as you linger in his presence. All at once an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing just to the right of the altar of incense, standing right by the fragrance of the worship going up from your heart. Zechariah was startled and overwhelmed with fear, but the angel reassured him, saying, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah. Do not be afraid, daughter. God is showing grace to you. For I have come to tell you that your prayer for a child has been answered. I have come to tell you that your prayer for this promise has been answered. Your prayer of redemption has been answered. Your prayer to see streams in the desert has been answered. Your prayer to see things blossom in the midst of barrenness, it has been answered." Little did Zechariah know there would be a process to the promise. The angel continued to say, "Your wife, Elizabeth, will bear you a son, and you are going to name him John. His birth will bring you much joy and gladness, and many will rejoice from him." So the birth of this promise will bring you much joy. It will bring you much gladness. And I know you are struggling to have joy right now. I know you're struggling to have gladness right now. But I promise you that the birth of this promise will ignite that joy within you. Will bring it back sevenfold. Will bring you much gladness. And you will rejoice because of the promise. You will rejoice because of the redemption that takes place. Many will rejoice because of him. Others will be affected by the testimony of God in your life. And he will be one of the great ones in the sight of God. He will drink no wine or strong drink, but he will be filled with the Holy Spirit even while still in his mother's womb. And he will persuade many in Israel to convert and turn back to the Lord their God. So the birth of this promise will cause a persuasion of many to convert and return back to the Lord their God. And so in the midst of your season of isolation, in the midst of the barrenness, in the midst of the questions, in the midst of the things that you don't understand, in the midst of the waiting, the fruit of this will be the manifestation of his glory that turns hearts back to the Father. The fruit of the manifestation of this promise will not only create in you a new wineskin. I know there's tearing. I know it's hard. I know there's heartache. But embrace the tearing, embrace the new wineskin, embrace the isolation, because he is near to the brokenhearted. He is near to the ones in isolation waiting on a promise. And there is a demonstration of his glory that in due time, in a kairos moment, will bring your heart much joy and much gladness. And many in Israel will be persuaded to turn back to the Father. Hearts will be turned back to the Father because of the demonstration of God in your life. Here's actually the point that I'm trying to get at. Verse 24. Soon afterward, his wife Elizabeth became pregnant and went into seclusion for the next 5 months. So soon afterwards, the promise was conceived. The process of the fulfillment and the birth of the promise started to come forth. And Elizabeth's response to conceiving the promise was to go into isolation, was to go into hiddenness, was to go into seclusion. And so, if you are believing in some rhema words, if you are believing in a promise, if the Lord has kissed your heart with a promise and is drawing you into intimacy with him ultimately, because that is what it's all about, by taking you through this process of believing for a rhema word to come to pass, and you have found yourself being led by the Spirit into a place of hiddenness, into a place of isolation, I want to encourage you that perhaps it is because the favor of God rests upon you. I want you to hear that again. Perhaps your season of isolation is because the favor of God is resting upon you. And so I just thank you, Father. Thank you for your daughters. Thank you for your daughters, Lord, that have believed you for your word and have taken you at your word, and come hell or high water have held on to your word. Thank you for their obedience. Thank you for their willingness to yield to you in the suffering, to run to you in their brokenness. Thank you for their childlikeness. And I know there may have been disappointment after disappointment after disappointment, and it's hard to hope again because you don't want to experience the pain that is attached to that past memory of disappointment. But I want to encourage you to open up your heart to Him deeper still and allow Him to come revive the areas of disappointment. Because He has good things in store for you, and He is working those areas of even disappointment for your good, to draw you in to deeper intimacy. And yes, we can get excited about the fulfillment of the promises, but let us not be deceived, because He is the promise, and the promise has been made manifest already. In the beginning was the Word. He has always been. The promise has always been. He is here now. The Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word is God. And we have the promise of the joy of His presence set before us right now. And yes, we will get to experience in this lifetime the fulfillment of the promises that He so tenderly speaks to us. But our satisfaction alone cannot be found in the fulfillment of that promise, because if it's not that, it's going to be the next. He takes us from glory to glory. So don't be deceived to think that all your happiness is going to come whenever this physical manifestation of a promise comes to pass in this lifetime. Yes, there will be happiness. Yes, there will be joy. But if that is our source of joy, we will be deceived. We will be empty. He is our source of joy. He is the well that never runs dry. Our source of joy is found in Him, and the promise is just a bonus. Okay? He is the promise. He is the joy set before us right now. And so in the midst of this moment of isolation, in the midst of the barrenness, in the midst of just the season of really struggling to wait for the manifestation of the promise, there is a table set before you to feast on the promise Himself and to find so much joy in the promise. There's so much joy available. There's a brook of bliss waiting for you in the midst of the pain of isolation. And so find that brook of bliss today in the secret place, in that place with you and Him. Find that brook of bliss and enter in to the joy set before you today. Love you guys.